Marianne Nolte. Alma Jesus will be chairing the meeting tonight, and she was coming from another meeting. So we're going to give it just a couple of minutes before we officially get started. So if you are joining us on broadcast, please hang tough and we'll be with you in a moment. Camille, how many folks do we need to have a quorum? Does it make sense for me to take roll and get to that point?
Here they come. There's Alma.
Hi, Alma.
Hi, everyone. Appreciate your patience.
So, Alma, we are live, and I have not taken roll, but it looks, I'm thinking we might have enough people for a quorum. So,
perfect.
I hereby pass the torch.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and call to order here at 5:34 p.m. and we will do roll call. And please just vocally let us know that you're here. And before we begin, I'd like to let you know that Caitlin Vargas has stepped off the committee, so we won't be calling her as the chair. And we will be discussing our chairs and co-chairs later in the agenda, and we'll get some clarity around titles and names and whatnot. And we'll bring up motions for nominations for the chair of the committee as we go forward. So I'll go ahead and start our roll call. Marianne Nolte.
I am here.
Franny Grindle.
Just here.
Mike Eister.
Present.
Amy Covich.
Here.
Susan Cox.
Present.
Councilor Greg Evans. Jerry Gatos. Leonard, and I apologies for the pronunciation of names. Leonard Storr. Myself, I'm here. Pete Knox.
Here.
Philip Shimu. And Leah Rauch.
And I would say we left Martin off the roll call on the agenda, but Martin Gator is here.
I am here.
Thank you for that, Tom. Okay. And again, the preliminary remarks from the chair, that was my announcement of Caitlin being no longer on the Strategic Planning Committee. We do have Pete Knox and Susan Cox, who are representatives from the board of directors. So we have representation from the board on this committee. Any announcements or additions to the agenda? I see none here. So I will pass the baton to Camille for our audience participation comments.
Alma, I am not seeing anyone. Oh, I have one public comment. So I'm going to read through the instructions really quickly. To indicate that you would like to provide testimony, please use the raise your hand button. For those attending via phone only, press *9 on your phone to raise your hand. When it is your time to speak, your name will be called. For those attending via phone only, the last 4 digits of your phone number will be called. Please state your name, city of residence, and who you are representing for the audio record. Once you have provided testimony, your hand will be lowered. Please do not raise your hand again. Only one opportunity to speak is provided. For those unable or not wanting to speak publicly, testimony may be provided via email at clerk@ltd.org. Philip, I have you just about ready. Let me share my screen for the timer, and I will give you the go-ahead. Philip, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Phil Farrington. I serve as the Planning and Real Estate Development Director for CDC Management Corp., a local family-owned real estate business representing ownership of a parcel in North Eugene on Coburg Road. We've been working for the past couple of years to redevelop the nearly 2-acre parcel at the corner of Coburg and Elysium. It's the last undeveloped commercial parcel on the Coburg Road corridor. We've secured land use approvals for the project, received initial permit approval for site development, and have submitted plans to the city for review of a privately engineered public improvement to construct a traffic signal at the Coburg Elysium intersection. We're actively working with tenants and finalizing lease terms and seeking other tenants before we break ground on this project. As you can imagine, embarking upon any development project is daunting, with increasing construction costs and a host of other variables that introduce uncertainty that could render a project infeasible. We're supportive of LTD's efforts to provide improved transit access across the community and on this corridor. However, we're concerned that the concept illustration included as part of the recommendation for enhanced corridor treatment on Coburg Road, that's on sheet CE12 of the packet that's available online, shows taking of property along the site's Coburg Road frontage that could jeopardize the project that's been the subject of considerable expense on our part and review and approval by the city. We understand that the recommendation is for additional study and community engagement prior to execution of enhanced corridor improvements along the Coburg Road corridor. We'd like to continue to be engaged in that process and request that staff's further work consider operational transit improvements in this location rather than physical improvements that will result in property takings, negatively impact viability of the planned development, and also impact the functionality and economic value of the existing Holly Square office building at the corner of Coburg Road and Beltline. Thanks for your consideration and for your time this evening. I'm happy to work with staff further and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. And Alma, I am not showing anyone else indicating that they would like to speak, so I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Camille. So next item on our agenda is the election of committee chairs for this committee. And I would like to, let's go ahead and open the floor to have that conversation. Mike?
So before we do that, I'd like to just offer a little bit of context. I was on the MX steering committee from which the strategic planning committee grew. And I wanted to provide the full committee with this context. The intent of the creation of the strategic planning committee was to provide the district with a broad range of input from the public and broad representation. It was specifically not intended to duplicate the board in any way. 2 board members in the bylaws were to be appointed to the strategic planning committee, not for the purpose of providing leadership or even being very engaged in the conversation. The purpose of the board members' presence on the strategic planning committee has been to convey back to the full board the conversations that took place in the strategic planning committee. Now, within the last couple of years, that has evolved to the point where the strategic planning committee chair and vice chair were actually going to some of the LTD board meetings. And I'm not even sure how many that was, Mary Ann, but I know that happened. But that was sort of an evolution. It was never intended that the chair be required to do that. It was always intended, though, that the chair and vice chair of this committee be a committee member that's not serving on the board. And it was also intended that board members who are serving on the committee not be actively engaged in committee discussion, but be present primarily to absorb the input from the committee members who are representing the community and to convey that back to the full LTD board. So I just wanted to provide that input as we consider nomination and election of our officers. And of course, I leave the floor open for anybody that wants to disagree with me or has a different perspective.
Thank you for that context, Mike. I want to check with Tom and Mark if there's any feedback or any other anything that you all have to share.
No, I think Mike laid out the history and context. So I think I think you should proceed with getting a board chair and vice chair. I guess you're the vice chair at this point, but
yeah, so I would love for anyone who is excited to be able to help lead this committee and support the team. As we mentioned, we have Pete and Susan who are representatives of the board, so they can bring that feedback back to the board. And I would love to hear from anyone else who would be, and I'm happy to serve in the chair role or the vice chair role, just knowing that this is an important team that is going to be able to help make those recommendations to the board of directors. And so far, in my 6 weeks of participating on this committee, the staff has been extremely helpful. So I highly encourage anyone who wants to be able to help support this process. Please jump in on that topic, on this opportunity.
I have a question. I have my hand up. New guy question. So from what I'm trying to understand with the committee itself, and especially with this position we're talking about, what I'm not really hearing is the description of what is entailed. What is the responsibility? So is it kind of like all encompassing? I mean, I sort of heard what you said, Mike, but I wasn't able to kind of drill into, okay, so what's actually going to be done? So could you help the new guy understand a little bit what's required? What are some of the requirements?
I bet Marianne could do that.
I will do my best. So I served as the vice chair all of last year, I think. And so this is vice chair knowledge. But it looked to me like you work with staff, both the chair and the vice chair will work with staff to come up with the agenda. And so that requires an agenda setting meeting that's usually about an hour a month before the meeting. Sometimes, so there's that meeting, sometimes there's a follow-up meeting as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then of course, presiding over the meetings themselves is part of it. And then, so those are the two big duties. And then there's usually just some kind of ad hoc messages that go back and forth and try to make sure that we're on the same page, or, hey, wait, we need to add this, or let's have that discussion later. And so it's mostly just those two meetings and then kind of some coordination around what we're talking about and next steps. Mm-hmm. I would guess the time commitment is, I mean, these meetings are 2 hours quarterly, and then the agenda setting is maybe 2 hours in addition to that. And then maybe an hour or so for those sort of ad hoc tasks that come up.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I would just say that you don't really have to know a lot about transit in order to do this. The staff are the technical experts, and they will support and help whoever is chairing and serving as vice chair. Really, when I think about the role of the chair, I think of as a person that's trying to help make things run smooth at the meetings and make sure that the agenda topics that the committee wants to be sure get addressed are on the agenda. So if you have moderated a meeting before, you are well qualified to serve as chair of this group.
Well, I was going to say for a mindset of timing, I mean, I'm still the new guy, but is there a amount of time that I would need to serve in a position to say I'd like to be considered, or because I'm still really new?
Perfect.
Like new. New is our friend around here.
I think the time, Martin, is you have to be on the committee for at least 15 minutes. It's now 5:46.
So I'm a little behind the gun, is what you're saying. I'm a little late on the update. Got it. Yeah, I actually wouldn't mind assisting as a vice chair. I don't think I would want to step into the mantle of the chair. I think that's a little out of my wheelhouse since I have not served before. But I wouldn't mind helping you out, Alma, as a vice to you.
That will be lovely, Mike.
I'd like to nominate Alma as the chair and Marty as the vice chair of our committee.
I'd like to second.
Okay, we have a nomination and a second. All
Philip also nominates, so I'm sorry to send this up on here. Sorry.
Sorry, I had some feedback, so I want to make sure I hear okay here. So maybe we should meet. Thank you. And I want to make sure, unless you have something to say, I didn't want to cut you off, so I will give you a second if you wanted to nominate yourself or you had anything else to say about the opportunity to be in the leadership of this committee. Okay. So we had a nomination from Mike and a second from Marianne. Before we move into that, is there anyone else? I want to make sure that anyone else wants to nominate themselves or someone else. Okay, so all in favor for myself being the chair and Martin being the vice chair?
Aye.
I see hands.
Aye.
Okay, and I want to make sure I go through the roll call. I have to go through the roll call here really quick. Apologies for my going through here. Marianne?
Aye.
Franny?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
He doesn't count. Pete?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
And I have Neil on here as well.
Neil is Metro TV. So
Okay.
yeah. So I think it's just you and Marty then.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, everyone. And we are ahead of schedule for this particular piece. So that's our goal, Marty, with these meetings, is sticking to the schedule. Lovely. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate that. And we're going to move to our next item on the agenda, which is the moving ahead recommendation. And this will be with Andrew and Rob, essentially.
Right. So Camille, is Rob Interfeld in the wings?
I see him, but he's muted. There he
Up
goes.
there he is.
I'm here. Hello.
The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Sorry. Not in my normal setup right now. So thank you. I'm really excited about this meeting. Rob and I are here to talk about moving ahead with you all again. And as we mentioned at the last meeting, at the kind of end of our presentation here, which will be brief, we want to engage you all in making a recommendation to LTD's board of directors about kind of where we should go with the project. And we'll explain exactly what the recommendation is. And we've brought some information I hope will be helpful to you all in making that recommendation. So just to get started here, we wanted to, I guess, start out. We're going to really, really briefly introduce the project for anyone who watches this in the future or is watching now and is not familiar with moving ahead. But if you need more information, we wanted to start out by saying that you can send us an email, questions@movingahead.org, or visit our website, movingahead.org. We have a ton of information on there. Been working on this for a long time, and we're really happy to talk with folks and get them oriented around the project. So, as I mentioned, SPC's heard this not countless, but quite a few times. But for those who haven't been a part of this process before, Moving Ahead is a partnership between the City of Eugene and Lane Transit District, and we're studying what kinds of investments we want to make on 5 of the most important corridors in the next 10 years, corridors in Eugene. So we started in 2015. We actually looked at 11 corridors, and through evaluation and public feedback, narrowed that to study 5 corridors. And these are Highway 99, River Road, downtown to LCC via 30th Avenue, Coburg Road, and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Along the way, using community input, we developed high-level street design concepts that would provide increased safety and accessibility for people walking, biking, and riding the bus. And these designs were created to help us meet many of the community's goals and plans, including Vision Zero, our Vision Zero plan, Climate Action Plan, Transportation System Plan, LTD's Long Range Transportation Plan, and many, many more. So the concepts we studied include high-level street design concepts with 3 transit options, and also safety and access improvements, which are kind of implemented in distinct ways on each of the corridors. The no-build alternative, you'll hear us talk about that, means no investment as part of Moving Ahead. It means not now, but in the future, if conditions change or there's interest in the community, we will consider investments in the future. The enhanced corridor alternative was designed as a moderate level of investment, whereas our MX investment is designed as our highest level of investment. And these concepts for each corridor were designed from the beginning with input from the public and with the goal of minimizing any of the potentially negative consequences that come from changes to the existing roadway. Moving Ahead is a process 6 years in the making. In 2015, we began with corridor community design workshops, which is where these photos are from. And we had the community help us figure out what street designs best met their vision for their community. We conducted analysis on 17 different environmental topics to determine what would happen if we implemented each of these alternatives on each of the corridors. And this was published in our alternatives analysis in 2018. It's a report that we released. After we did that, we conducted several rounds of public engagement in the corridors and refined kind of the options we were presenting and narrowing them, which eventually led to a public hearing in October of 2019. And at each of those decision points over the last 6 years, we've gotten feedback from the public, gotten recommendations from SPC and the Moving Ahead Oversight Committee, which is our other project advisory committee, and they will be meeting on December 10th, which is Friday. And often we went to City Council and LT's board and sought their direction as well. So this process has really been very intentional along the way. Now that all of those steps are complete, we are here tonight to ask SPC for a recommendation on what's called a locally preferred alternative, or an LPA, for each corridor. And I'm going to explain that in a second. But this recommendation will go to LTD's board in early 2022 as LTD's board and Eugene City Council begin to deliberate in preparation for their adoption of an LPA on each corridor. So just so you understand what we're asking you to do here, an LPA is kind of, I would describe it as, well, I'll just, so when the board and council select an LPA on each corridor next year, it's a part of the kind of federal environmental review and permitting process. It sets the high level vision for the corridor, but is not the final design. So what we're asking you is kind of the big picture concept. What is your recommendation for the big picture concept, not the tiny details on each of these corridors? If we select, for instance, if we select MX on a corridor as the LPA, it doesn't lock us into a specific MX design, but it does mean that we'll be working to figure out how MX can work in that corridor. And we've done a little bit of that work, but there's a lot of work left to do. For instance, we've been analyzing where we think stations might go, and where those stations might require changes to, for instance, a driveway or property acquisition, as we heard from a commenter earlier tonight. The next steps of the process after we select an LPA are to take that conceptual design, figure out all of those small details, and mitigate any negative impacts, maximize any positive impacts. An LPA doesn't lock us into building anything. It allows us to take the next steps in the process, which are to work on those detailed designs, go through the environmental review process, seek funding for the project. Eugene City Council and LTD's board, as well as the broader public and advisory groups like SPC, will have additional opportunities to shape this project as we go through the process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob, who is going to introduce our staff technical recommendation.
Hi, so as Andrew said, your role will be, I think Andrew said this, that making recommendations to the LTD board, and then the oversight committee will make a recommendation to both the LTD board and the Eugene City Council. So in order to help you with your recommendation, staff have reviewed all the analysis and public feedback we have received throughout the project. And we believe this recommendation best meets the project's purpose, needs, goals, and objectives, which were affirmed by the Moving Ahead Oversight Committee back in 2015, and were used to guide the analysis that was done. And all that information can be found, the purpose, the needs, goals, and objectives can be found in the alternatives analysis document, which you can find on the Moving Ahead website. So now what we'd like to do is walk you through the different elements of the recommendation. But you can see on the screen here, this is basically the recommendation is what we're recommending for each of the 5 corridors. And then what I'll do is I'll walk you through them one by one. So Andrew, why don't you move to the next slide? So first is Highway 99, and we're recommending enhanced corridor on Highway 99. And so this corridor will use the existing MX route on 6th and 7th, and then go up Highway 99 and down Barger to the Beltline Winco area. And it provides 34% transit travel time improvement and increases ridership along the corridor compared to no build. But the safety investments are comparable to those found in the MX alternative. It will increase transit frequency without increasing system-wide operations and maintenance costs. And the capital costs are significantly lower than for MX. And it's also projected to have fewer impacts, physical impacts to adjacent properties and businesses compared to MX. And the feedback from the community was supportive of investments along the corridor, with safety really being the key consideration. And like I said, we found that the enhanced corridor and the MX had similar safety benefits. One other thing I'd like to point out is both the enhanced corridor and MX have a pedestrian bridge that will go over the railroad tracks and connect to Train Song Park. So those of you who are familiar with the Train Song neighborhood know that it's really cut off from a lot of the rest of Eugene by the railroad, by 2 sets of railroad tracks, really, the Portland Western tracks on the west side and the Union Pacific tracks on the east side of the neighborhood. So it's really hard for people to access. Not just the LTD system, but other shopping on Highway 99, schools, etc. So we think that element of this alternative would really provide a great benefit for the people who live in the Train Song neighborhood. Now, one thing about Highway 99 corridor and River Road, which I'll talk about next, we're really recommending that those are the 2 that we focus on first for implementation. And we could talk about that a little bit more later. So why don't we go to the next slide? So River Road, we're recommending MX, and this provides the greatest travel time savings. The ridership projections show an increase 7 times greater for MX than for the enhanced corridor or alternative compared to no build. And the MX alternative contains much greater safety investment for people walking and biking. One of the things the MX alternative does is it takes the outer vehicle lanes on River Road along most of it, going up to maybe, I think, like Maxwell, or, not all the way to Beltline, because there we need the vehicle lanes, but it takes those outer lanes and makes them bus-only lanes, what we call BAT lanes, bus and turn lanes, or business access transit lanes. And so that really, one benefit of that is it's going to move most of the vehicles away from the sidewalks and the bike lanes. And so people who are biking in the adjacent bike lanes won't feel as much traffic kind of really close to them. We think that the MX alignment or the MX alternative has the potential to support much more redevelopment along the corridor compared to the other alternatives. And the draft River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan calls for transit investments to support goals like that. And there was actually a transit-oriented development study done that's right now in sort of the adoption phase that analyzed potential zoning around where the MX stations would be. And during the public engagement process, this alternative had the highest amount of support compared, while the no build had the lowest amount for River Road. So this is the other of the 5 corridors that we're recommending that we focus on for implementation. Next slide, please.
A question real quick.
Sure.
Just going back, thanks, Albert. The second bullet, the ridership projections show increase 7 times greater for MX than enhanced corridor compared to no build. Does that mean, I'm not sure what that means.
I'm gonna let Andrew
help me understand just the difference between the MX versus enhanced corridor in terms of ridership?
Sure. So what we did was, one of the big questions we always get asked is, will this increase ridership? So for all of these corridors, we used the regional transportation demand model, which is run by LCOG. And we had our consultants work with LCOG to kind of say in 2035, which is like the year that we're looking out at, and we're saying, you know, Eugene has grown, and we have all this need for transportation. What is, you know, what's the ridership going to look like? And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I apologize. I'm working just on a laptop with no screen, so it's hard to pull things like that up. But this specific thing, when we looked at it, the enhanced corridor doesn't have a large increase in ridership. And I think a lot of that is related to, it's not a big increase in service. And we know that increases to service lead to more ridership. So when we look at that, right, no build is the base. We're expecting to have that if we do nothing. Enhanced corridor will get us some, and MX will give us 7 times whatever that enhanced corridor number was. And those can be found really easily if you go to our website and pull up the executive summary for the alternatives analysis, or I can follow up with you if you're curious on the specifics.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I just wasn't sure whether the 7 times was more than enhanced corridor or more than no build. So now I get it. Thank you.
We have Franny raising her hand.
Yes, thank you. I just have a question, Rob. You talked about in the 99 corridor, the enhanced corridor, there was a PED bridge over the railroad track. Is that a overcrossing bridge or?
Right, it will be a pedestrian bridge that goes over the railroad tracks. It has not been designed yet.
And it would be separate from anything else, like
it would just be for people walking, maybe biking, you know, depending on how it's designed. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Standalone bridge. Yep.
Awesome.
I mean, one thing I'll acknowledge is we'll have to figure out exactly where to put it. A property acquisition, you know, as you're well aware, Franny, working for ODOT, you know, there's a whole project development process we'll have to go through for that, and so there could be some hurdles along the way. But we'd like to make it happen.
Thanks. For the record, I'd like to recognize Councillor Evans has joined us, and for the record, it was at 5:57 p.m. and he's raising his hand. Please.
Okay. Rob, I have a couple of questions around the River Road route. I know that it's the second highest ridership route in the system outside of MX. And what I've heard consistently from people over there is, you know, we need more service. We need more service. But, you know, I just don't think that 7 times greater. Are we looking at, subdivision developments out further on River Road, or, you know, other things that are developing along that corridor that we need to meet that demand?
So I'll let Andrew answer that from a technical level, but just to put a couple of things out for people just to think about are, first of all, when the ridership for MX is looking at half a mile, that people walk further than for enhanced corridors. So that's just based on the fact that it's a bus rapid transit service with bigger stations and the research has shown like nationally that BRT draws people from further away, just like a light rail would, that people are willing to walk further. One thing, I think Andrew could probably talk about that they base this on the zoning in the corridor. And I think one thing we're starting to see along the River Road corridor right now is a lot of multifamily housing development. The Iris Place, St. Vinny's development is wrapping up. There's the Lombard Apartments under construction. There's another apartment complex coming through the pipeline right now, near where, what's it called? The bakery is. That's a social service organization right there.
Yeah.
I'm just blanking on the name. So I think there's a lot of potential for multifamily on the River Road corridor. And then the terminus would be the new Santa Clara transit station. So Andrew probably could tell you more from a technical level to answer your question.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I don't think it's like parcel specific, but we're using kind of the best projections for how many people are going to live along the corridor. As I mentioned, in 2035 was the year that we looked out and we said, what's our traffic going to be like? What's our ridership going to be like? So all of our kind of numbers like that are looking at what we expect to see in 2035. So we are looking at population growth, job growth, and that is based on the zoning and kind of the state's population estimates, LCOG's information that they maintain in their model.
So are we looking at an east-west growth model in terms of ridership, that we're going to have more people out on the east and west edges of the line, as opposed to people coming into the Santa Clara station and doing park and ride?
I cannot
because Rob just said that that funnel is going to widen because we have MX there. I'm just trying to figure out just exactly where is that ridership going to come from.
I think it's both. The model does, as Rob mentioned, nationally and locally, when people have looked at our system, and we kind of know this, the MX, even compared to our other routes that come pretty frequently, there's just something there, whether it's the station amenities, how easy it feels to ride, how much faster the trip is. But bus rapid transit investments tend to get more ridership than you would expect off of a route that works similarly but is not bus rapid transit. And I think Tom's got something he wants to say. He's been on the Transportation Research Board's Bus Rapid Transit Committee for a long time.
Yeah, I get it, but that's just me trying to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of ridership. When we launched Franklin, our ridership went sky high on MX, much higher than our original predictions.
Well, and if I can, Greg, you might recall that part of the reason there was Main Street is such a strong ridership route for regular service, and what we found was, our concern was that people would drop off from having to make the transfer at the Springfield station. In fact, more people started riding it just because of the travel time savings that MX provided for Franklin. In a similar fashion, that's going to drive some of the ridership on increases that we would expect with MX on River Road. And then to your point about kind of the north side of River Road, we expect that and if you're not familiar, we're going to be providing connector service up into that area to feed into the Santa Clara station, and expect that that's going to drive some ridership as well.
Okay, so moving along is the 30th Avenue to LCC corridor. So this corridor goes from the downtown station down Oak and up, down Pearl, up Oak to Amazon Parkway, and then 30th Avenue out to LCC. And what was found was that both the enhanced corridor and MX provided minimal travel time savings compared to no build, and the enhanced corridor option did not provide an increase in ridership. Also, there weren't really corridor safety investments generated through the community involvement and planning process that we went through. There were other projects the city of Eugene was already working on or was working on through other processes, like our High Street Protected Bikeway, that were happening kind of as a separate process. And other studies indicated that transit may be more appropriate on streets parallel to Amazon Parkway rather than on Amazon Parkway itself. And if you think about it, there's not a lot of development along Amazon Parkway itself in terms of like how people get to the bus stops. So any recommended investment option for this corridor should occur after the city and LTD and Lane County complete other studies and transportation investment projects. So what we're recommending no build for this corridor for now, but may come back and take another look at the future. Those of you that followed LTD's Transit Tomorrow process know that they were looking at Hilliard and Patterson as the frequent transit that would go out to LTD. The other thing is that right now, Lane County is doing a study of 30th Avenue that the city of Eugene and LTD are part of, looking at how to make it a safer street for walking and biking. That's all I have to say about that corridor, is that, like I said, right now we're recommending that no action be taken to further it. And the last thing I'll say is that, and LTD staff could certainly tell you this more accurately, but the ridership, the service to LCC really ebbs and flows over the course of both the school day, the week, and the year, depending on when classes are in session. And I'm sure Councilor Evans could tell you a lot about that too, since he works there. And so just having like an MX style or enhanced corridor that runs every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes doesn't necessarily make sense to match up with the needs of the community at LCC. Next slide. Coburg Road, we're recommending enhanced corridor. It turns out that both the MX and enhanced corridor alternatives both had identical travel time savings, but the enhanced corridor is both much less expensive and it has significantly fewer impacts to adjacent properties and businesses compared to MX. It also provides many of the same safety benefits found in the MX alternative. During the public engagement process, the enhanced corridor had the highest average rating of the alternatives in terms of community support. And MX had both high levels of support, but also high level of concern, and no build had the least support. Something else is that the city, we're having a lot of traffic delay and just traffic problems on the lower end of the corridor between Oakway Road and the Ferry Street Bridge. And so we would like to take a closer look at how the traffic circulation works at that lower end of the corridor. So we're going to be looking at doing a study of that area that would integrate public transportation. And so we'd kind of like to, I wouldn't say put this corridor on the back burner, but take maybe a more deliberate, a slower approach, and also do more community engagement, because there were some businesses and property owners in the corridor that had some concerns. So we want to make sure that they're engaged. And that's it for that slide. And then the next one is Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. We're recommending an enhanced corridor for this, this is the only alternative we looked at for this corridor other than no build. And the enhanced corridor provides 15% transit travel time savings compared to no build, and a similar increase in ridership. Also, the city applied for a grant through ODOT's All Roads Transportation Safety Grant Program to actually make some of the safety program investments along the corridor, really just the part on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard from the Centennial Loop East or Parkway West to the eastern end of the corridor. So, and when you get into Springfield, and what we're looking at is similar to River Road, taking the outer lanes and turning them into bat lanes, so just for buses and turning vehicles. And we've had a lot of speeding issues on the street, unsafe weaving and bad driving behavior. And we think that by constraining the general purpose vehicle traffic to the center lane, the inner lanes, that the corridor will become safer and the speeds will come down. We're also going to put in a few pedestrian crossings as part of the funding that was received through this grant, and I think some lighting too. So like it says here, we're taking a coordinated and flexible approach to funding this corridor that will allow for incremental implementation. That's one of the nice things about the enhanced corridors, because they use regular buses. They can be implemented in a more incremental way, whereas with MX, once you move to the MX buses, they need MX stations, and you kind of have to build the whole corridor at once. So that's one thing that we like about having kind of a portfolio of projects to move forward with, that we can move forward with at Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Highway 99, look for funding that can help us implement those corridors more incrementally, but then apply for a larger federal small starts grant, which is the primary funding program for bus rapid transit projects, to fund the MX on River Road. So it gives that more flexibility, especially with the infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress recently. It has $100 billion over 5 years in discretionary grant programs for the U.S. Department of Transportation, which is a really historic level of funding for that agency to have to disperse. And so we'd like to be able to, we can match up different corridors to different grant programs depending on the funding amount and what's the right fit for the criteria for that grant program. Next slide, please. I think I'm going to be handing it back to Andrew now.
Yeah, so just kind of zooming out a little bit, I mentioned that we are here to ask you for your recommendation, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Your recommendation will feed into City Council and LTD's board's deliberations, which we expect them to start taking that up early next year, potentially like February, March timeline. Looking for dates though, so nothing is nailed down. Eventually, they will adopt an LPA, and that sets staff up to do all of kind of these next steps, which this is kind of the bigger picture. I mentioned that moving ahead is intended to be kind of a 10-year portfolio of projects. I like the way that Rob put that, right? We're going to be working to advance whatever the LPAs are, kind of understanding that River Road and Highway 99 might be higher priorities to implement funding. That's direction we've gotten from City Council and I believe LTD's board. When we select the LPA, really we're just taking that small step forward that allows us to refine designs, continue working with stakeholders, and take this project one step farther. We can then seek funding and get into the environmental review process and get into permitting and construction after that, which leads to actually being able to use the infrastructure. It's a pretty deliberate process, and at each kind of step along the way, there are going to be a lot of opportunities both for committees like SPC, members of the public, but also our decision makers on the board and council to weigh in. This isn't, the step that we're taking now is not like a license to do construction. There are actually many more steps and many more decisions that need to be made, but it is a really important and key step that we're asking the board and the council to take next year that enables us to continue doing that work. So with that, we wanted to open up for questions and discussions. I can put the staff recommendation back up if that's helpful. It's also in the packet. We intended that really as a starting place. We are not specifically asking you to adopt this as your recommendation per se. You are more than welcome to. We believe that this really best meets the project's needs and goals, but that's why we're here, because we want to know what you all believe the recommendation should be. And this was intended as a starting place because I think over time we've learned that there are just so many combinations of how you can put this together that people, I think some of the feedback we heard was looking for a recommendation. So that's why we brought this to you. But with that, I'd really like to turn it over to the committee to hear what you all have to say.
Amy? I see you.
Hi. Yep. Hi, everyone. Staff, thank you for the presentation. I think this is a great strategy overall and a good opportunity to take advantage of these new federal funds that will be available. Working in real estate development, I'm sensitive to the public comment that was made by Phil Farrington, and I'm wondering if staff could elaborate a little bit more on how you would work with property owners like Phil to ensure that, changes made as a result of these plans wouldn't kind of kill a project like his, and yeah, what the timeline might be also for the Coburg corridor in particular.
Yeah, I actually really love talking about this because I'm really proud of the work that LTD does. I'm really hoping Tom or Rob can back me up. But on West Eugene, for instance, when we were kind of at the level we're at now, where we say, here's what we believe the impacts are, we've been looking at like the widest footprint that we think we're going to have to do. And the next steps are actually to narrow that up and to eliminate or mitigate as many of those issues as we can. And LTD goes well above and beyond what is required by the Federal Transit Administration when we do these projects, because we really value working with the community. And on West Eugene, I want to say that we eliminated more than half, not that this is a guarantee that you're going to get this number on this project, but historically we've been able to eliminate, I think, more than half of all of the impacts we anticipated at a point in time like this. And then we were able to further mitigate. And by mitigate, I mean, for instance, if we thought we had to take away a parking spot from a business, for instance, that we could actually repaint their parking lot and get the same number of spaces. And it's not a perfect situation, but it is a much better situation than losing a parking spot for a local business. So we're able to eliminate or mitigate most of the impacts that we see at a stage, at this stage in the process. And we really have a robust process that we go out and work with property owners on their property and with our engineers and really try to get creative and come up with solutions that work for transit, work for people walking and biking, but also really work for our local business community and property owners.
Yeah, to add to what Andrew said, so for West Eugene and Max, what we, first of all, like just during the I guess I'll start by saying, you know, LTD came out and said, we want dedicated lanes everywhere. That was how LTD started West Eugene and Max. It did not go over well. And the idea was this, you know, we have direction from the Eugene City Council. We want gold-plated BRT. And that is the best thing to have from a public transportation perspective. So to have the dedicated lanes, especially on a really, congested corridor like West 11th Avenue, there was a lot of pushback from property owners and businesses in West Eugene. And so LTD took a step back and looked at where do we absolutely need the dedicated lanes, and also just trying to avoid those larger business impacts and to focus more on, you know, some of the small impacts, but not making entire businesses have to relocate. So that's kind of where things. And then what we did is once we got direction from the City Council LTD board, and then LTD got the funding to actually do the design from the federal government. We did a process called Design Refinement, where we looked at every single business and property impact. We had meetings with an interdisciplinary team of staff, and we met with the business and property owners too. And I participated in some of those meetings, and we heard what they had to say, what the challenges were. We went back, and then we tried to modify the design to meet their concerns without having a detrimental impact on the project. In some cases, and find that middle ground. So that was a very involved process that we went through, and we would definitely do that for anything that comes out of this. The other thing I'll say is that moving ahead was much more surgical. We were much more careful about where the property and business impacts were. There were some places where we were like, this is just going to be too big. Like we need the dedicated lanes here. And I'll give the example, but it's just too big an impact. So the example I'll give is Coburg Road MX, where at Willa Kenzie, there's a lot of delay, and it would be great to have dedicated bus lanes there, but there are businesses on one corner built right up to the corner, which is, what we've said we want from an urban design perspective there. And it would be really impactful to many businesses there to have dedicated lanes. So we did not even propose that. The buses in the MX alternative would run through Willa Kenzie intersection and mixed traffic. And so if this project moving ahead is much more limited in where the impacts are compared to West Eugene MX. And there are a few places where there are some impacts, especially going on River Road on the south side of Belline, because that's one of the most congested areas in our whole region is River Road at Belline. And so if we really want to have efficient transit on the River Road corridor, we need those dedicated lanes south of Belline. But there will be impacts to some businesses there on the west side of the street in particular that I'm aware of. So I think it's sort of a broader, and I'll acknowledge I couldn't figure out how to see Phil's question. I might not have the ability to see that, but there's this balancing act we have as a community about these projects like MX that have huge community benefits and also wanting to be sensitive to impacts to businesses and property owners. And sometimes those impacts just cannot be avoided. And I think that's just the nature of public works projects in America, in the world. And I feel like we've done a really good job on this project of limiting that, but it's just, I don't think it's possible to completely avoid that and still have a good project.
Well, if I could just add a little bit to what Andrew and Rob have said. First of all, when you look at all the corridors that we looked at for moving ahead, I would say Coburg Road is to reach back into my Southern California roots, a very gnarly corridor to try and figure out. And I know ODOT's experiencing some of that, just trying to work at the interchange with Beltline and Coburg Road. And there's some, there's basically a lot of unresolved transportation issues along this corridor. And so, I would say, as Rob reiterated, our intent in this next step is to figure out what can we do, how can we make the transportation system as a whole, not just BRT or enhanced corridor transit. How can we make the transportation system work along that corridor? And again, I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done by all the agencies here at the table to try and figure that one out.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, Mike?
Yeah, first I want to thank Amy for the question. It's an important question, and in some ways it's sort of at the crux of the important issues that we have to wrestle with. By way of full disclosure, I want to let the committee know that I had a conversation with Phil Farrington earlier today that was very much along the lines of what he said to the group tonight. In fact, I suggested to him that it'd probably be a good idea for him to just talk with the group tonight. And I think he had that in mind anyway, but I sort of reinforced the idea. Also, during much of the West Eugene MX work, I chaired the LTD board and want to back up what we've heard from Andrew and Rob and Tom. I remember being in businesses with the general manager, listening to an upset business owner, and we listened. Adjustments were made. In one case, the route was going to require a large sign in front of a business to come down. LTD found a way to avoid that. LTD did everything they possibly could to be true to the objective of MX, while also trying to honor and respect and protect the businesses along the line. And I have confidence that LTD will continue to do that. And that's what makes me think that the concerns raised by Philip Farrington will be addressed by the district. So I guess I should also have mentioned, I listened to Phil. I wasn't influenced by what he said any more than what he said at the meeting tonight. But I am influenced by my experience with LTD, which tells me that the district tries really hard to make sure that businesses are not disadvantaged by any of the work that we do. So that's all I have to say.
Franny? Thanks, Mike.
I'll preference my comments by saying that I really appreciated the presentation, and I like what was presented. I can go for it. I have a little bit more question on MLK. I see this as an important east-west connection. And Rob, you had mentioned that you were looking at taking out the external 2 lanes, because there's a lot of room in that cross-section. The 2 external lanes and maybe making those bus only. But then that kind of looks to me like maybe it's approaching MX, and that would be awesome to have MX on that route. And I know that in order to do that right, we'd really need to have Centennial, into Springfield. And maybe that conversation can be broached again at some point with Springfield to see, because if you think about the Greyhound going into the Springfield station and the connection with MLK and all the traffic that uses that Centennial route into the games, into the city, it just makes a lot of sense. And I hope that we continue having those conversations with Springfield for that east and west. But meanwhile, About the question about the exterior lanes being bus only, would those be like bat lanes, and could it be like an MX Light? Question mark.
So, in response to MX on MLK, we're not considering that at this time for the reason you mentioned, that Springfield was not able to participate in the project, though they were invited. That's a whole nother story from 2015, 2016 timeframe. But they didn't have the resources to focus on that. And we believe, and believed at the time, that we can't consider MX without considering the whole corridor. And our designs are really able to, we can revisit that and eventually put MX on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in the future, if that's where the community wants to go. So as far as MX Light, Rob can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that most of the cross-section, most of the Eugene section of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard will have the bat lanes. So we won't have the MX stations, but we can, as LTD operations, we can scale those up as we make investments in the corridor. The current funding that the city has doesn't address what I consider to be the major transit issue on that corridor, which is turning left onto Coburg Road from Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. With the enhanced corridor as it's designed, right? If we did the whole thing, we would have a left turn lane for LTD buses there. We'd have a little piece of exclusive lane to help us get through traffic there. That is missing from what the city has already funded. They funded a good bit of safety, and we haven't funded all of the transit investment. But selecting enhanced corridor means that we can be flexible. When there's another program that we believe this would be a good fit for, we could try to make that happen. And that's I think the major strength of the enhanced corridor.
To just briefly add to what Andrew said, that study that I mentioned earlier of Lower Coburg Road, we would likely look at that intersection with Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard then, and that getting that turn lane in, and because it's really like, how do we design that, redesign that intersection?
Great, thank you so much.
Marianne?
Amy asked a question about the timeline for the study on Coburg Road, just the traffic study. Do you have a sense of when that might take place?
Marianne, we're having a bit of trouble hearing you. Do you mind repeating that?
I wonder in the background. Question about the timeline for the study on Coburg Road.
We don't have a timeline yet. It's honestly like at the city, we have a lot on our plate. It's something that we want to get to, but we have not prioritized it at this point.
One of the comments I wanted to make is I appreciated that Andrew and Rob put some time together for those of us who are newer on this committee to do a refresher on the Moving Ahead project. That was extremely helpful for me to understand, get a deeper dive into these pieces. So that was helpful as a committee member. So I appreciate that extra time that you put into making that happen. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? Philip?
Thank you. Quick question, and I know this is mainly about a system and everything, but in the packet, I did read that there's a shortage of drivers. So I plans to expand and do all this, but they won't really be much if there's not enough drivers. So my question is, what are the ways that LTD is trying to entice people to come work and actually implement transportation going forward?
So, Philip, I'll tell you that's actually something that we're going to discuss in the last agenda item on the agenda tonight is the status of our drivers and all. And the other thing I would say in the context of what we're talking about here with moving ahead has a longer timeline. we're hoping to move projects forward, but you go through the additional work that we're going to do just with respect to environmental and design, and then you go get find the money to build the project, and you build the project. We're talking about 4 or 5 years, we expect that the issue of hiring drivers is going to be resolved before that. And so again, we'll talk much more about that in that agenda item at the end of the agenda. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So what we want to do today, and I want to make sure there's space for folks if there are any other additional questions, is to be able to move forward with the recommendation from staff for the locally preferred alternatives as presented to go to the board of directors. So we need to make sure that we, again, if everyone has asked their questions and feels comfortable with this, or if there are any amendments to this proposal from staff.
Yeah, I would just be really clear, Alma. We are asking you to basically recommend an alternative, so either MX enhanced corridor or no build for each of the 5 corridors. And if that is the same as the staff recommendation, then that is wonderful. It is. If it's different, that's also wonderful. And we just want to hear what you all recommend.
I want to be thoughtful about how we go about the process, since this is the first opportunity for me to chair this process. Would it help to go through each of the kind of the corridors that we're discussing, line each of them, and see if, from the team, from the committee, if we vote on each of those as the staff recommendation, or if there's an alternative? Or if you're all comfortable, having read all the notes, to say we go forward as proposed by staff, as is. Are there any recommendations from the committee? Councillor Evans?
I'm totally supportive of this set of initiatives. Years ago, when I was on the board with Mike Eister and a few other people, we had started looking at this from an MX perspective. So Highway 99 corridor was going to be MX, and then, originally Coburg Road was supposed to have MX, but the business people fought that and kind of sank that initiative at that time. I think enhanced transit on these corridors is probably the perfect solution for a lot of folks. I will caution us that if we do pass this package and move it on to the board of directors, we're going to have trouble on Coburg Road. Whether people think we're going to have people go out to these individual businesses just like they did with West 11th and talk to these folks and try to convince them that this is not going to hurt their business. But I would like to move. I would like to move this forward. So I'm not sure how to frame this motion, but the motion is to move this package forward.
Marianne?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
Okay. I like staff's recommendations. I guess the only thing that I wanted to talk about was the MX on River Road. I know a few years ago when this was first brought up, Best and I took a look at this, and it seemed like the land use along River Road wasn't necessarily compatible with MX, just because it didn't seem like there was enough dense housing really that would support that use. That was a few years ago. Things have changed, so I guess I just wanted to make extra sure that you as staff feel like there's going to be enough density in that neighborhood to support MX, and that the River Road neighbors I guess I'm just concerned. I don't, as we always say, I don't want to be running empty buses. So that's all.
I will just say that the ridership projections we have are the best guess that we can have at this point in time. You're correct that there have been a number of developments on River Road, but the thing that as a professional, I think is most appropriate, and the reason that we're recommending it is actually that on River Road, there's been really coordinated land use planning and transportation planning. And you can build things, but if you don't coordinate the land use with the transportation investment, you're not going to see the transportation results that you want. And based on the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan, calling for transit investment as a way to achieve some of their goals, and based on the transit oriented development study, which is recommending changes to the land use code, which from my understanding, they have not been adopted, but just the level of coordination going on in those planning efforts with the planning efforts that we still have to do. My professional opinion is that we will be successful on that corridor at integrating the transportation and land use investments that we're talking about making. There's been a lot of work done there, and there's going to be more. And that isn't true. That's part of why we're not recommending MX on other corridors, for instance, because that work has not been done. And we know that it's very important to do in coordination.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mike?
Yes, I am and have been for a long time a pretty strong advocate for MX. At the same time, I'd be remiss, and I haven't heard anybody else refer to this. We've talked about MX improving ridership. We do have a route that has missed our ridership projections considerably, and we get reminded about that pretty often. And so just because you build it doesn't mean it will come. And I guess I'd like to support Greg's motion with the understanding that if further study by staff results in a conclusion that MX will not perform as we are hoping that it would, that we have the prerogative to back down to another option.
To be clear on the process, Mike,
yeah,
that is 100% what we're talking about. We're not locking ourselves into anything today. We're setting the vision. And if we get down the road a little farther and we don't like what we see, we can start dialing it back.
Thanks.
Thank you for that, Andrew. I think, again, attending the refresher and that conversation around this is one of the many steps, but one of the steps for us to take it to the next phase to look at those parts. That was really helpful. And so, Mike, thank you for articulating what I was hoping for when I was in those sessions.
So if Greg's motion hasn't been seconded, I'm prepared to second it.
Thank you, Mike. All right, I'm going to go through our roll call here for folks in favor.
Yeah, you may want to just see if there's any more discussion before we vote, just for the heck of it.
Thank you. Any additional discussion from folks? Philip?
Sorry. I was just curious as to why for 30th Ave to LCC by downtown, there's a no build. It seems like maybe possibly I think you could possibly do like an enhanced corridor with additional study and abatement, such as like Holberg Road. So I was just curious if you could expound on why there's a no build.
Well, for one thing, LTD already runs very frequent transit to LCC on that corridor. Is that right, Andrea? And what was found was that the alternatives didn't really generate more ridership than what's already happening, and that by having the kind of service LTD has to LCC now, there's more flexibility to vary the frequency by time of day. So there might be like certain times of day where buses are running every 10 minutes, but other times where maybe they're every 20 or 30, depending on when the need is at LCC. Okay.
And I would also add, Rob's 100% correct. The college students I don't want to speak for the employees. The college students all want to get there 5 minutes before class. So if we run a bus that gets there 10 minutes before class, everybody wants to pack on the bus that gets there 5 minutes before class and it's still crowded. That's been our experience generally. We also didn't see travel time improvement, right? So we're not seeing travel time improvement that saves LTD money. We're not seeing a ridership increase, which, that means people it's going to draw, people value it more, I guess. So from the transit side, we're not really getting a lot. And on the safety side, right, there are all of these other studies and plans that are making those investments. So we didn't have a lot of that in the plan because of these other studies. So that's why staff recommended the no build. It's really more about not making transit investments that aren't going to be a really big win. And if we talk about doing that study in design refinement, I think we're talking about maybe looking at Hilliard and Patterson. That's an open question. I'm not saying that that's like definitive, but the way that we looked at this project, we looked at Amazon Parkway, and it might make more sense to put those investments somewhere else. I don't know. We haven't studied it. But the Amazon Parkway investments that we're talking about here didn't really meet the project's goals. That's why we got to a no build on that.
Thank you for that.
Anyone else? We're ahead of schedule, so I'm happy to give space to folks if they want to share anything. So we have Councillor Evans put forth a motion and Mike Eister seconded that motion. So if we are comfortable, I will go ahead and go through the roll call now to see how folks are feeling. Okay. Marianne?
I vote in favor of the motion.
Franny?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Councillor Evans?
Aye.
Pete?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
And it's an aye for me as well. Camille, did I miss anyone?
Our vice chair.
Marty.
Oh, Marty, and
Marty.
you're not Marty.
Yeah.
Call me silent passenger, silent partner. Aye.
Thank you.
We're going to correct that on the agenda next time, and then Alma will be able to.
Thank you. I read everything on the teleprompter apparently, so thank you very much. Appreciate that. So the motion passed. Thank you all for your support, and we are 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So wonderful job, folks.
Could I add some context to this? Some of you might be familiar with this story, but I came across something that was written back in 1906 by the editors of what was called at the time the Eugene Weekly Guard. And of course, that later merged with the Eugene Register to become the Register Guard. But they said in 1906, they said, the die will be cast for or against the building of a city here in the acceptance or rejection of the proposal now pending before the council, which was their opinion on the council's consideration of an electric streetcar. And of course, the council passed that, and they've continued to play a role overseeing regional transit. And I put that out there just because, every so often we come across these moments where, it's time to kind of make these big decisions. And this is the beginning of that. So I just wanted to share that little bit of history with you all.
Thank you, Tom. And with that, you can continue to the next agenda item, which is discussing our GM recruitment process.
Okay, great. And fortunately for you, we have someplace I saw him, Aaron Bingaman from TransPro. TransPro is the firm that's helping us with the recruitment of the next general manager, and Aaron is heading up that effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron.
Good afternoon, Tom, and thanks. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Can I get one thumbs up from somebody? All right, dynamite. Great to be with you. That's like 7 thumbs up. What a great committee. Great to be with you all this afternoon. Really appreciate the opportunity. Mark Johnson asked me to join your agenda today and have had the opportunity to engage with the board members on the committee a couple times. And delighted to share some about our process and engage you in a dialogue here a little bit about what we need to be looking for in the next general manager at LTD. Really exciting time for us. I'm actually going to share a screen, fingers crossed, and should see a few slides there. So want to talk just briefly about our process. We'll be going through a multi-step effort. And right now we're in these first 2 boxes of really collaborating with the agency, stakeholders in the community, and others to understand what's our priorities for the next leader of LTD, as well as getting our arms around those core competencies and credentials that we think really define a successful general manager for us. It's been our experience. I don't even think I introduced myself, but Aaron Bingaman, Managing Principal of Transfro. It's been our experience in executive searches around the country that as we do a great job of really understanding what success looks like for our next leaders going into the search on the front end, the better we do at really defining what success looks like and knowing what you're looking for, the better we will be at presenting really great candidates for the role. And it tends to expedite the process. We don't have to go back to the well, if you will, other times. So we really try and spend time reinforcing this point to make sure we know what we're looking for in our next leaders and getting great insight to build on to that. Of course, we'll execute a comprehensive recruitment strategy, not only looking throughout Oregon and the Pacific Northwest, but looking all throughout the country. I think this will be a really interesting and compelling opportunity for rising stars and rock stars alike, if you will, who are interested in being part of a great community and a progressive agency that's doing a lot of exciting things. Just witnessed the last, hour worth of conversation, some really exciting things happening for LTD right now. We'll provide screening support, submit finalists, go through an interview process and facilitate that with collaboration from the board, and then do post-interview process and work on that compensation and negotiation to get the right person onto the team. So that's just a brief overview of our process. I mentioned already that we are working here on these strategic priorities. So, making sure that not only do we have alignment with the strategic business plan of the agency, but also getting some clarity around expectations from the community. So committees like this help guide us on that. Working to make sure that if there are gaps, that we're looking for professionals that can help close gaps in the leadership and really deliver on those strategic priorities. And we're doing a variety of things actually in the field right now. We have some stakeholder surveys out and some employee surveys out, asking 5-6 critical questions to get a really diverse array of feedback into understanding what folks will be looking for in a successful general manager candidate. The board's been really committed to challenging our group to make sure that not only is their voice heard as board members, but we're, again, meeting with community stakeholders, listening to employees, and using all of that to triangulate the job description, the posting that we'll use, as well as some definition of the characteristics of a successful candidate. And so that's where I want to land today with you on some conversation is around that. Looking at and talking about the characteristics of a successful candidate at LTD. One of the things we did with the board recently is have them give us input through a tool we use. It's called the Predictive Index. It's not dissimilar to something like the Clifton Strengths Finder or other personality and characteristic defining assets. So Predictive Index gives us insight into, if any of you have taken one, this is something you would take, and it gives us an insight into your strongest behaviors. Now, one of the things we can do with that tool is also ask a question when you're hiring somebody, what are the behaviors that you would hope to see, the strongest behaviors you would hope to see from a successful candidate? So we queried the board with this, and this tool has provided for us a couple of profiles. So I'm going to talk through what you see on the screen. This is the language that is used in the predictive index system, but a captain, a persuader, a strategist. Listen to those words. So as I read these to you, I'm going to ask you a question. How do these resonate with you as traits for our successful general manager candidate? So a captain is defined by predictive index as a problem solver who likes change and innovation while controlling the big picture. A persuader is a risk-taking, socially poised, and motivating team builder. A strategist is results-oriented, innovative, and analytical with a drive for change. And so a reminder that these profiles are presented to us via feedback from the LTD board. So I'm just curious, listening to those three different descriptions, this is a kind of a combination, a composite of feedback from the board. How do these resonate with you as you start to think about the next leader for LTD? And I'll go at once. Mr. Evans.
I would add another column to this profile, and that is the public face of the agency. That's what our general manager really needs to do, and really needs to be able to work with one of our biggest stakeholders, which is the business community that provides the lion's share of our operating budget. And we really need to I don't want to say clean up our image. I think we have a very good image. We have a very good image across the country. People at home don't necessarily appreciate that. But being able to work with our business community is incredibly important. And I harken back to Phyllis Luby, who I worked for 35 years ago. She knew the community. She had good connections and relationships with a variety of shakers and movers. And that's one of the things that I think is important on this, because the rest of the organization is basically run by her senior leadership staff or his senior leadership staff. And we really need someone who is going to be dynamic, personable, knows what they're talking about, and has the ability to communicate that to people who are not necessarily transit fans.
Okay, thank you for that. Externally facing, champion of the agency. Ms. Cubbage, I think I saw your hand second.
Yeah, that's right. Just to piggyback on what Councillor Evans said, I think those are great comments. Someone who's maybe not just a persuader, but who can also listen, someone who's curious, not wants to understand and not just kind of explain. And I think that goes a long way in building trust with the community and staff and stakeholders.
There's someone who listens intentionally, right? Demonstrates back to the community, hey, we heard you. This is what we did differently, and or we heard you, but we still did it this way, and here's why. With that, make sure that I'm not putting words in your mouth, but is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
Go ahead. Okay, Ms. Brindle.
Thank you. I like what both of the previous two people have said, Amy and Councillor Evans. I would you know, the captain and the persuader, I think, are really important. The strategist, I kind of think that the strategist is really embedded into the captain role a little bit, and that it's going to be hard to find somebody that has all of these qualities in a really strong way, but that you can get the strategist within your ranks of your agency, and pull out the technical expertise and the strategist of the operations person or whatever, and have that person help you in your role as the captain and persuader. And then the other thing I would add is this person needs to be a good collaborator. We have, strong elected officials in the county, in the MPO, and collaboration is going to be key for success. And what Amy had said about listening and hearing and then working along with to solve problems, I think that's going to be really important. Thank you for asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Gator.
Yes, is there such thing as a quadruple piggyback? To come off of what everyone has said. But to play off of this, I think what I'd like to really key in on is it literally, sort of what Franny was talking about. I do believe that strategist does tie into the captain role, but I think there needs to be a separate category what people are sort of touching on, and that's a nurturing role all by itself, nurturing. Because from what I've understood and learned about where we are here in just Eugene, Oregon, Pacific Northwest proper, from another part of the country I lived in, which was Minnesota, the Midwest. We have the Minnesota Nice, and here we have the passive-aggressive Pacific Northwest two-step, or whatever you want to call it here. There needs to be a nurturing mindset with who's ever coming on board to understand where they need to empathize and also nurture those conversations and those relationships to grow them, because that's just as important as leading in this area, from what I've picked up. Just from coming from different parts of the country. So I think to piggyback and to add on into 2 cents and all those other cliches that I could use, I think that nurturing mindset has to be a very, very specific part of that dynamic. It's just my 2 cents. Or more like 10.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that thought. I think along those lines is, I'm not sure everybody's familiar with these, but LTD has six core values, and certainly we want all of our employees to live these values, right? The reason we define values is they help us determine, how do we expect a member of the LTD team to show up to deliver the mission that we all have here. And so it's not to say all 6 of these aren't important. They are all important. But if we are looking for somebody and just building off of the suggestion around nurturing, is there any 1 or 2 of these 6 as members of this committee that really speak to you that, boy, if there is a value that this person lives, that this next general manager represents for us to our people and our community? Is there 1 or 2 that really, really speak to you right now at this time and place in order for them to be successful in the role? Ms. Covage, is your hand raised again? I just want to make sure.
Oh, no, I need to lower it. Thank you.
No worries. Any thoughts on the value that you really are looking for from a priority perspective with the next general manager? Mr. Shamu.
Thank you. So for me personally, I would say innovative, just because with the way the world is moving, there's different types of emerging technologies and things like that that would definitely be able to assist LTD and things like that. So I would personally say, like, someone that I'm looking for is someone that can think outside the box and someone that's willing to, I guess, go that extra mile, as well as like think like, hey, instead of doing this, we can do it this way and either save money or make ridership increase, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Ms. Nolte.
Thank you. I would say collaboration really stands out for me, like Franny brought up, that really a public transit system only works when it's embedded in the communities that it serves. And so somebody who's willing to form those relationships and make decisions and stand by them with community leaders, I think is going to be really important.
Thank you. I think when we were having the same discussion with our board, look at directors Knox and Cox, felt like innovation and collaboration both emerged in that discussion as well when we were talking with the board. So good to see alignment there. I'm going to keep us moving just because I do have a couple other questions, and certainly welcome your thoughts as we come through. We had a suggestion from Councilor Evans about making sure that this person is representative in the community, outwardly facing. And that's actually one of the questions we like to ask here. Are we talking about somebody that's externally focused or internally focused? And we show this to you in context with the areas of success, the priorities defined in the strategic business plan for LTD. And so, your thoughts on an expectation around that, Mr. Evans.
Well, there's one thing I forgot from my earlier statement, and that's visionary. I think that we are at a point right now where transit use over the next 10 years is going to increase dramatically, and more and more people are going to get out of their cars, and use public transit as a way to go to work or do shopping or whatever the case may be. I think we're on the edge of that right now. And so I would like to see somebody who has some creativity and who has a vision for where the agency is going to go 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road.
Other thoughts on, I see, I'm sorry, Alma, I'm going to go with your first name because I don't want to, when your name is spelled E-H-R-E-N, you're very particular about names, so I want to get them right.
No worries. I understand. I think looking at the externally versus internally focused, kind of looking at this slide, for example, for like the big picture long game roadmap makes a lot of sense, right? I think that when I'm thinking about bringing a new person into an organization, it's someone that can help champion the culture. And so, we have the weighing out our points of 30 versus 25. I think you have to start with making sure it's someone that's going to be all the things that the others on the committee had said, and also really bringing the team together and championing the culture and helping develop that so that you can hire and retain certain folks that fit that culture and fit the values of an organization. So, as we're thinking about, visionary and innovation and collaborative, and for me, a big part of that is, a core of equity. It's establishing that culture in an organization. So thinking of someone who's going to be able to champion that within the organization, because then all the other pieces fall, in my opinion, fall into place with customer satisfaction, the community value, all of those pieces will fall into place once you develop someone that can really help champion the culture of an organization.
Yeah, so when we have those conversations, right, one of the conversations we would have in an interview, right, demonstrate to us where you've influenced the culture, how did you champion that, and balance that with an external focus, right? That might be the kind of interview question we would translate that to. Mr. Shimhue.
Thank you. You asked externally or internally focused. I would say in the beginning more externally focused, just because LTD serves the population. So they should be more focused on what the community needs, and then that should translate internally. So like if they're seeing that the community needs XYZ, then they can transfer all of that information. Yep, that's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you. I know we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure we're mindful. Just You know, these three questions can really be taken at the same time, but just as we start to evaluate and vet candidates, and I think that I'll show you the last question, but I'll set the stage here. But are there specific competencies or experiences that you will be looking for that you hope the board finds in the next general manager? Are there any particular criteria for evaluating candidates? You just want to make sure you say it, we hear it, that get reflected in that final job description and how we evaluate things. So I'll kind of put those three questions before you before I go to the last question. Ms. Nolte?
Thanks. I guess I would say for desired experiences, maybe somebody who has skills with bringing teams together, and that includes the internal team and also the board, so that everybody's kind of working from the same playbook and communicates well together.
Great. Thank you for that. Other thoughts on these? Any key essential experiences, competencies you'll be looking for? While you think on that, I'll ask this last question. And are we looking for LTD to be a great organization or a great transit agency? And it's a nuanced question. There are people that we can find in the industry that can do the transit stuff. We can file the reports and make the FTA happy and all that stuff, and can be a really strong, great transit agency just inside that box. Are we open to somebody that, you know, has done all of these things that you've identified here, right? They're collaborative and they're innovative and they're visionary, but maybe they've been running a zoo, or they led a transportation. They built a great board and they built a great team at a public library or an airport or something like that. Are we open to a non-transit person when we think about the future of the organization? Ms. Nolte.
I am. I think anybody who's awesome is awesome. And LTD staff are super knowledgeable, and I feel like they can kind of captain that piece of the ship. If there's a great leader, they can come from anywhere, in my opinion.
Mr. Shimmy.
I'm just piggybacking off of that. I think that if they're a great candidate, regardless of the industry that they're coming from, that they should definitely be given that chance. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this? What will continue? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Evans.
Yeah, I got it. What I would say is diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important part of who this individual is or will be. The agency has had a very good track record on hiring diverse people at all levels of the organization, from the top down, and it still is. So the majority of, numbers wise, LTD knocks every other public agency, maybe with the exception of the University of Oregon, out of the box. It really does. And, from bus operators, customer service people, and people going all through the ranks, we want to see somebody, or at least I want to see somebody who embraces that value and keeps LTD as a leader in access, equity, and inclusion. I think that's really important.
Thank you. That's great. And Mr. Eicher, I think you're going to get the closing thought on this.
Well, once again, I want to second my colleague, Greg Evans. As usual, he's right on target. The last thing I wanted to ask, Aaron, is have we thought about the role of the strategic planning committee going down the road in the search process, in the search and selection process?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Mark Johnson on helping answer that question. Of course, our team is going to collaborate with the authority of the board as y'all see fit. You are unique in the amount of reach as an organization that we've been charged with. The community surveys, the forums, all that. Not typically a step we take in a search, but we're always happy to do it because, again, it engages, diversity of thought, diversity of opinion and view, and builds ownership in, identification of great candidates and great leaders. So not to put Mark on the spot, but here's the spotlight, Mark.
No, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, Mike, I mean, this is the first step in that, we knew that this meeting, the Strategic Planning Committee was coming up, and so I called Aaron and said, hey, this is the first opportunity to connect with this group. They're an important group. Let's get their input. And now as we go down the road, we're getting input from lots of community groups and members. And so what we'll do is circle back around, and at some point, as we're finalizing the characteristics, job description, whatever, we'll have that discussion with this group again. I'm sure members will be included in the interview process, and we'll include as much as we can. Yeah, I guess to put it bluntly. At some point, we've got to quit the public process and actually make decisions. So, we're expecting probably around February to put it out in the street, and it'll probably be springtime before we actually start the interview process. So,
well, I guess I was just thinking, Mark, usually at some point there's opportunity for subsets of the community to participate in interviewing or listening sessions and to provide feedback, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it
seems that SPC could easily fit into one of those kind of functions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure. Our job here is to continue our listening right now. And reflect that into both a job description and evaluation criteria for draft for the board's consideration as we keep moving through the process. So really appreciate everybody's time and attention tonight. We've gone over a few minutes. My apologies for that, but really insightful feedback. Appreciate your time, and we'll be showing you over the next month or so where and how we listen to that, and you'll see that in the job description as we advance it.
Thank you for the time. Moving to our next agenda item, developing LTV service restoration strategy with Tom.
So I'm going to ask you to consider whether you want me to take basically less than 10 minutes to go through this. I'm willing to come back next time if you'd like to do that. I can hit the high points if you'd like, whatever the pleasure of the group is.
I think we don't meet for another 3 months.
Right.
Yeah, so perhaps, keeping a big broad stroke, big picture around this. And then again, the team can look at the notes, and then we can come back to this at the next meeting too.
Okay, so really quick then, as some of you have heard, and certainly the board members have gotten presentations on this, there are two uncertainties that we face moving forward. The most immediate one is our ability to hire enough drivers to actually be able to add service. And you've heard about that. I think generally that people are having to pay more to get people to work, but this is a pattern for us, or an issue for us that we haven't had before. Well, there have been a lot of transit operators in the Northwest that have experienced this. I know Seattle has, and TriMet, and but this is kind of related to COVID and kind of the disruption in the workforce, we're seeing this issue. And so in addition to that, kind of combined with that, while we're bringing new drivers on at some level, we're also experiencing a lot of retirement. Actually, the data would show when you compare across the state, we have one of the older operator workforces in the state, and so we're getting those people at the high end of that to start retiring. So that's a real issue in being able to add service in the short run. In the longer run, we're interested, along with a lot of other transit operators, as to how commuting and travel in general is going to come back in kind of the post COVID era, where there's a lot of hybrid work, and that's going to change, the nature of the commute for in terms of from our standpoint, in terms of how many people are commuting and when they're going to commute. And so we're working with our partners to try and figure this out over time. But that's going to be something that we want to be thinking about as we move forward, and looking at having resources to actually add service. How is that going to look, and what are we going to do, and how do we approach that in a period of uncertainty that could be anywhere from 12 to 24 months to really resolve. So we're going to kind of be working towards figuring out what that looks like. I wanted to show you this is a picture. Oh, I just have to share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. You can you see the graphic that I'm showing?
Yes.
Okay. So what this shows, there's two things. One is the average weekday boardings on the bottom. Here is a bar graph that shows you kind of how things have gone over the last, since March 6th. And you can see March 6th, 35,000 average weekday boardings. That's an average. That's been an average for us for several years in terms of weekday ridership. You can see how precipitously it fell at the beginning of COVID. It stabilized at around 12,000 rides average weekday. I mean, it didn't matter what time of year. That's just kind of pretty steady ridership. That's an indication those are people that really needed the service and found a way to make it work for them, because we also cut back our service during that time. What you see at the end of this is with the beginning of school, high school actually started before the U of O went into session. We saw within a couple of weeks, there was a 50% increase in ridership over what we had seen right at the beginning of September. So we're at about 18,000 rides now. Things tend to dip a little bit in the kind of Thanksgiving period. That last week on the bar there, you can see the average weekday ridership is a lot less because of the Thanksgiving holidays. The other thing that we look at from an operations standpoint that we're encouraged with is the chart on the top here is looking at the distribution of boardings by time of day. And so just to highlight the post or pre-COVID pattern of ridership was this early peaks around 6:30 or so. There's a kind of a second peak that's actually more reflective of the student riders in the morning. So you've got this peak here. It dips down a little bit and then builds back up to an even higher peak in the evening. Actually, this is around 3 p.m., which again is driven by student ridership. And what we saw for a long time as we were going through the middle of the pandemic was this, you can see this gray here. There was kind of a flat, kind of a general, there were no real peaks. It just kind of, rose during the middle of the day and then came back down, kind of a gentle hill as opposed to peaks. And what we started to see in this most recent, 7 or 8 weeks is the return of the peak. And so that's encouraging to us for a couple of reasons. One is we know how to operate in a peak. So it takes a certain kind of operation to put buses out, bring them back in, put them out again. And so we're starting to see there's some normalcy. You can see how that light blue pattern really starts to match what we're seeing in terms of the peaks in the pre-COVID time. So that's encouraging to us that at least the ridership that's using the system now is behaving according to the norms that we've gotten used to. But again, as we move forward, and we can talk more about this in the next time we meet, how is that the rest of the workforce going to start coming back to work, and what's that going to look like in terms of ridership? So those are the two things I really wanted to talk to you about today, and I'd answer any questions you have.
Any questions from the committee? I do think that our next meeting is going to be in March 29th, I believe. And so it will be interesting to kind of, we do have an agenda items listed, but I think this is an opportunity for us to kind of use this as one of our points to be taking a look at and being aware of. So it'll be interesting to see what happens at the end of March when we come back.
Yeah,
Mike?
Sure. My comment was not related to this specifically, so I'll hold off until we get closing comments.
Well, if there's no other comments about, thank you, Tom, for this brief overview. Real quick, I just want to make sure we touched on this since we brought it up at the beginning of the hour of the meeting, and that's actually on our agenda. The next piece will be looking at our upcoming meeting. So I will, Mike, if you'd like to jump in and share.
Thanks. We were talking about participation in the search and selection process, and I don't want to fail to mention that BEST has been very actively involved and interested in the quality of our transportation, and is highly qualified to participate in the search and selection process. So I hope you keep that in mind as we go through the process. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mike. So are there any other items for the good of the order? Okay, we have in the packet, you'll see our future meeting agendas. And now that we have our new chairs in place, there'll be conversations to have around what those, we'll be working with staff on the agenda items coming up, especially considering some of the restoration strategy going forward as well. And if there are, I want to make sure there are no other comments for the good of the order, we can adjourn at 7:28. Tom, did you?
Yeah, I'll just say, and Camille, I'm hoping you can help me out here, but at a certain time before the next meeting, we will be holding an agenda setting committee and meeting, and well, typically we like the chair and vice chair to be there. People are welcome to join that meeting, and so we'll get that out when we get it scheduled.
And one more thing. Excuse me, and one more thing in response to Mike's request with BEST and others in the community as far as involvement in the GM process. We did just send out an email survey to several hundred people in the community with an opportunity to, weigh in and give us input, and we'll be circling around with key stakeholders after that to, get a little more input and whatnot. So we fully intend to be as collaborative and reach as many people as we can in this process. So,
thanks, Mark.
Yep.
And in support of you, Tom, yes, the agenda setting meeting is already scheduled, and I will update the invitation.
Thanks.
All
right, folks. Thank you all. And if there is anything else, let's see if
Great job, Alma. Nice work.
Go. Good job.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate y'all. And we are adjourning at 7:29, so I feel like I did a good thing, and Marty will connect. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.